Hey YouTubers, it's Hajra. So here's the part 2 of the latest watercolor versus gouache demo on my channel. You might recall that in part 1, I compared watercolor with transparent, luminous, multifaceted gems, and gouache with opaque and evenly lit and colored stones. Then I walked you through a limited color scheme and color wheel construction and did the watercolor side of the demo. I'd like to mention that because this painting sat around for some time, I did soften some harder edges on the watercolor side with some scrubber brushes when the camera was off. These are basically harder nylon brushes in a filbert brush head, and you can dampen them and use them to soften any hard edges on a dry painted area. I did this for some of the hair edges, some of the dress edges, and even for some small edges on the butterfly. It gives a nice mix of hard and soft edges and places for the eye to move and rest, and it lets the background melt a little bit into the foreground. Now it's time to complete the gouache or opaque watercolor side. Let's start easy peasy by painting in the butterfly a solid yellow, as that's what he mostly is. Now I'll go down to the infamous tacky yearbook dress and start putting down swatches or tiles of color. The dress is going to be loose and impressionistic, like on the watercolor side, so details are not important. Just a lot of various colored blobs. Blend, then lighten with white, add darker purple tiles for shadow areas, brighten yellow and orange, then more blending, more whitening, and more sprucing up colors until you like what you see. The paint should be semi-opaque to opaque, and not super thin and wet or too dry. If it lays down with a pasty, textured dry brush effect, it's too dry. If it's transparent and runny, then it's too watery. Don't worry, try it a few times and you'll get the hang of it. So I did a basic tiling method with the dress, and now I'm gonna stain the skin and hair yellow to warm up the paper from the cold stark white. I'm gonna turn the camera off and do a grisaille or tonal or value layer in just purple. You've seen me do this in past videos as a value underpainting for watercolor or for gouache. Remember, I did the watercolor side of this demo blow by blow in the first part of this video for the hands and face. When I turned the camera off to do the grisaille for the gouache side, I did the same face and hand all over again, but this time just in purple, which is a shadow color, instead of in all the colors on my palette. Now when I move on, I can lay down local skin color with the grisaille layer as a guide. When I did the grisaille, I thought of value, light to dark. Now I can focus mostly on color and temperature. Yellow or peach or tan or rose, warm or cool, and so on. Because gouache is opaque, I can even cover and lighten areas of the underpainting where it looks too dark to me. As with the watercolor side, I've chosen a more fantastical and emotive limited color scheme than the original reference for this study. The result is that the lighting looks more golden and the skin tones are more diverse than they are in the original reference. So it's not an even peachy shade, it's like lots of other different colors. I like this, which is why I did it, but you can do whatever you want for your study. Continue to mold the face and neck and features with the gouache colors over the grisaille as a guide. Go darker and bolder with your colors in dark value areas and lighter and milder in lighter value areas. As with the watercolor side, use a dampish, almost dry, clean brush to blend edges for wherever a soft blended look is needed. Gouache will automatically dry with a hard edge, like watercolor, unless you soften it. This is the opposite of painting in oil paint, where soft edges are easy, as I've heard artists like Jeff Watts mention, and hard edges are the ones you have to consciously create in oil. Now please pardon this grainy footage that's going to show up just for a bit right now. I didn't know that zooming in post-production would do this. Next time I'll stick to live shot zooms. Anyway, you can see how I render the lips and eyelid with the local colors over the grisaille, and again, it's a guide. It provides the value and shape, and I add the local color and color intensity and temperature. Back to normal footage and spruce up the yellow in the barrette and the earring, then onto the hair. For the watercolor side, I went from light to dark, saving the white of the paper for the highlight. For the gouache side, I can use the mid-tone method for the hair. Lay down the mass or mid-tone color, which is, in this case, a purpley black. Now I can add highlights back in with white and yellow tints. This will be wet on dry, like most of the work that I've done on the gouache side. The gouache side looks cooler, bluer, and grayer than the watercolor side, even though we started with similar temperature colors on both sides. Why? Well, because we used only the white of the paper, on the watercolor side, there is no cooling effect. On the gouache side, however, we have titanium or zinc white to create tints and highlights, and because titanium and zinc white are both a bluish, cool temperature, everywhere where they're added, the colors get grayer and colder. Thus, the gouache version of a painting will be cooler and grayer than a watercolor version of the same study. As with the watercolor side, keep the hair loose and impressionistic. It's a great look for studies and also for a lot of finished paintings as well. And that's a wrap. Remember, this is just an instructional demo from a reference. If this had been an original piece or a master study I wanted to sell, I could take both sides further. I could keep tweaking color and form until it was more finished. You can feel free to tighten up and render more than I did, or go loose and more unfinished than I did. Either way, I hope you've learned a bit more about watercolor and gouache painting in this demo. I've got some exciting videos coming up, from quick art card and watercolor marker reviews to detailed watercolor and gouache journal pieces from all over the San Francisco Bay Area. See you soon, and happy painting!